and then on top of that was a,
Yes.
This is Michael Yeager. I could not do this without him.
Genius. Absolute genius.
Yes.
Just gonna keep the volume down until you guys are.
So, do we have to punch this at all?
No,
Okay, it's all,
When that light's lit, you're hot.
okay.
I'm the only one that has to learn to punch.
What are you doing? Okay.
I think I was just told. Anyway, but you can see what's up there. Nothing yet.
Yeah.
one of my upcoming vlogs references my box set of Alice in Wonderland through the Looking Glass.
Oh, that was fun.
Would it be okay to mention you and a link to? Okay, all right then.
I don't have a website.
Okay, but I can mention you and say where you
Yeah,
are.
I have an email, but not a website.
Would you want that email
I-
or not want that?
I am
Gee, I
used
don't know.
to.
What do you think? I'm not so good on these things.
I think we're going to start. We're
Well,
going.
if this is your business email,
Yeah.
We're going to start.
who knows?
We have a full day and a lot of wonderful resources with us, and we're going to start. You can't hear it? Jim, you can't hear it? Oh, Mike, what do I do now?
Nothing.
Okay. This is great fun, first of all, because the subjects had to be researched in very different ways, very. And you may think that it's lopsided because I had to spend so much time on the first one because the resources for the others are here and one is absent in all ways. I will let you know how. So there are in the back about 3 or 4 handouts. And I want to explain that you can blame me for all choices and all mistakes because everybody's done a terrific job. They're just terrific. But why would I even dare to try to think about the soul of Cleveland? Well, we have people in the room, including Suzanne, who were around a table 4 to 6 times in our living room discussing that subject. What is the soul of Cleveland? It's different from what we do. It's how we feel. It's the perspective that we might have had changed by something that happened or something that we barely remember, believe me. It gets harder and harder. And it is, I think, important because history changes every day. It disappears every day, actually. And that's my perspective. And so Jim and I celebrated our 60th this way and wanted to give to the community these opportunities to explore. And we did it at the Happy Dog in September. We explored some subjects. Coming around the bend is our survey, and you have an opportunity. Around that table, by the way, were not only a book manager, but an artist, an environmentalist, a writer of Can magazine, an architect, an educator. They were terrific. And you know them, most of them, I think, if I told you. That's the subject, though, is the fact that you have individual perspectives. I'm not going to argue with that. And you'll say, oh, you forgot so-and-so. That's true, because, not because I wanted to forget, but because I had to be selective. Now, for today, why are we at Moreland Courts? You will explore more about Moreland Courts next time when we talk about the building, the drawings, and we have uncovered beautiful drawings. And they will be on the walls. We have the history. We have someone who was born here going to talk to us. and has lived here. And then we have some people in the room who live here now as well. I want to practice moving this to the next thing. That's our list of resources for today on the wall, on the screen. And so we want to thank everybody. I hope that's what it is. And if I forgot somebody, blame me. So history comes in all sorts of ways. Let's be frank about it. You can read about it if there's publication. There was only one group that had publication, one book on the subject of, one book on the subject of booksellers and dealers by Russell Duino, who's been working on it all his life. He lives across the street, and I found it at the Western Reserve Historical Society. And so when you look at that list of resources, you'll see I used every library, everyone. They were all doing this with me. They kid me that they're all working for me, at some point. But they have been, and Bill Tregoning is not here, but he set up a group of prints, and they're on a table, and they relate to what we're doing today. Other ways of looking at history certainly are anecdotes, and we hope we have anecdotes here today. A lot of it is anecdotal and memorable. But then the first person story is the best. And so we have first person stories today too, because after a while, those aren't possible. So that's how history comes. And I also have to admit that I use the internet. I was teaching the humanities a few years ago, and I would not let my students use internet. I wanted them to use books. I wanted them to experience the city. I wanted them to have that opportunity for whatever time they were with me to explore that way. But now, of course, you could never do that. So I'd be behind them. Okay, so the artwork we'll explain in a few minutes. Ellie and I are going to start with a little discussion of bookstores. We have had a lot of wonderful bookstores in Cleveland, as you know.
This is true.
And you've been, because you preserve books, you've had to have a relationship with a lot of them. So in today's discussion, we'll talk about some that aren't being discussed fully that might have been your favorites or places that you have memories of. And so you're up for that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you like the choices for today?
How could I say no, other than no? I mean, other than yes. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I think this is a good group of people who have had bookstores or worked in bookstores and know a lot about it.
Okay. Later, we're going to share how bookstores begin, some of our favorites that aren't here, and so forth. So Ellie and I are going to do that. And I just have to say that because this is the kind of soul of Cleveland exploration, everything comes back to our experiences over 60 years. And I must say that I've had a deep relationship with Fireside, Apple Tree. At Apple Tree, a man came in and sat down and read the whole book. I think he bought it. But, it was really those kind of things. And Annie will remember when I went to booksellers. Barnes & Noble. Remember? Borders, I'm sorry, Borders. Oh, first mistake, my fault. And then the relationship with Richard Gildenmeister. I mean, who can forget Richard? He's at McGregor now, and I have followed him all my life, and he has been a trooper behind me, and he would tell me about Annie Uden at Higbee's, or he would tell me about his life at Shaker Square, and I remember him dusting the sidewalk every morning. And then he was at booksellers here and over at Legacy. Okay, so those are the things, and then people keep bringing up Peter Kieselgolf, and the arcade comes into the picture later, and I followed his trail. He's not living, but I followed it, and I'm going to just say that later we'll have a chance for anyone to add whatever they want today. I'm not proposing. So we're going to start with, I'm going to punch this. That's the Taylor Arcade. The Taylor Arcade where the bookstore was Lovecoff's. Anyone ever went there?
Yep.
No, Sue did, and you did? Okay, so this is the bookstore that has a book written about it by a man that says he was smitten by what it had for him at age 19 when he walked in, and culture hit him in the face. The arcade was built in 1905, and it's just a strip of retail business next to the Taylor Company, and it joined forces later, but it's between Prospect and Euclid. By the 20s, Cleveland was pretty thriving, and this started in 1916, which was a difficult time. We were on the eve of the war to end all wars, and it was a place, though, Cleveland was a place that you could think of thriving and being civic, because it was part of our heyday. By the 20s, the store started in 1916. Cleveland started to be responsive to a very special situation. To this gentleman, Richard Lovecoff, who came here from Europe in 1907, but started the bookstore in 1916. By the way, he lived in Shaker later. And he came to do things, but this was his passion. He was a bookseller that was not primarily commercial. It was an intellectual thing for him. We're fortunate to have a book by Philip Kaplan. Anyone know Philip Kaplan? Artist? Philip Kaplan. And he wrote a wonderful essay, lengthy essay on this bookstore. And that's how we know what it was like. Otherwise, we wouldn't. All of Philip Kaplan's collection, he's the 19-year-old that was smitten, is at the Peninsula Library. And he was once a president of the Cocoon Club. He was an artist, and he was a book collector, and honestly, the way he describes it is that culture slapped him in the face when he was 19 at Lovecoff's. He describes the desk where Richard Lovecoff sat, and he was sort of like a newspaper editor at that desk. And he was in a short sleeve white shirt and a flowing black bow tie. So picture that. What started with, this is going to be quote from this because it really is genuine and fun. What started with small magazines and a weekly visit became 3 or 4 times a week to see what was new. Great discussions, especially in the periodical area. Although Lofcost specialized in books that were banned or unavailable in other bookstores like James Joyce, Edward Pound, William College Williams, others. But Lofcoff himself was a moderator of discussion, was a professor, a teacher, and advisor to his clients. Never making decisions or opinions, but leading the way. He did not tolerate ordinary books. He sent everybody to the department stores for those. He didn't censor, gave instructions as to how to open a book, handle them, and people who disobeyed were asked to leave. This is from first-hand observation. His bookcases were assembled from knocked-down boxes that he stacked to the ceiling. That's how he did it. And he was very frugal. He came out of Germany at a difficult time. It was also a time when Germans, because of the war, the Germans were not, welcomed with open arms everywhere. Now, something special started to happen there, though. So I'm going to march along here. That's another picture of the arcade. This is his welcoming to his operation. And so, can everybody see it? Kathleen, can you see it?
No, I can't.
It's terrific. And it really captures what I was trying to tell you. But we think it might have been written by Hart Crane, but we aren't sure. Hart Crane.
You think so?
We think. Everything is we think unless we know. Okay. This is a bookmark. He really, really honored artists. He honored artists of all kinds. This is a bookmark by an architect, Les Caz, and it was published by George Howe at Yale, this bookmark. This is Birchfield. The next group of slides are going to be of artists that he encouraged, nurtured, really nurtured, and put a place on his wall for them, and blessed them on their way and kept up with them, and they came in for these discussions. The point is, I see a whole discussion group more than once a week. This is Birchfield. The reason Birchfield is here, even though he left town a few years later, is that this is a scene that he painted while he was going back and forth to school at the Cleveland Institute of Art. And I thought that one remark, he wrote journals. That's the other thing about some of these artists that we're going to note, is that they wrote notes, journals, and so forth. That's how we know how they felt about Cleveland and what they were doing. So Kathleen Cervini, who's a poet laureate of Cleveland Heights, is going to read a little bit from what he felt about regional art, because we often say, what is regional art? He had an opinion.
So you want the regional quote first?
Yeah.
Okay. I should note that this information comes from a paper written by Helen Weinberg, who was a professor of English at the Cleveland Institute of Art and happened to be my professor when I was at the Cleveland Institute of Art. So this is from a paper that she entitled Toward an American Self, Charles Birchfield's Early Years in Salem, Ohio, and at the Cleveland Institute of Art. So Birchfield is responding to comments by another Cleveland School of Art teacher, Henry Keller, who really was a little bit dismissive of the concept of regionalism. He thought it was rather provincial, but he also thought that it might have a much larger perspective. And in Birchfield's own journals, he says, quote, "Mr. Keller's region, if he has one, is the whole Middle West, the whole vast area between our two great mountain systems. The idea that from this territory will come the future significant culture of America is one of his favorite themes."
So that's the reason I start with Birchfield, because it has a statement about. This is William Summers' Brandywine studio, painted by William Summer. Now, Bill Summer is very important to Lofkoff's. It's the one situation where William Summer met Hart Crane, the poet. And they would talk, they were, from the biography of Crane, we say, for Crane, these visits with Summers was numbered among the great events of his life. He documents that. He wrote of them at length to everyone he knew. If Crane can be said to have had a teacher, Summer was the teacher. Summer acted as a surrogate father, counselor, drinking companion, confidant, infallible conversationalist. We know those things about Summer because everybody mentions them, but we don't have books about it. We don't have anything written by Summer in the same way that we have documentation from Birchfield or Wilcox. Frank Wilcox was someone who went to the bookstore. This is a church that is no longer, but it's around the corner from the bookstore at the time that in 1913 this was there. No, I don't. Bill Trelawney, are there notes?
Oh.
Okay, here's Wilcox portrait of Crane. That is in the collection at Case Western Reserve, Special Collections, and it is very, very fragile. I don't think anyone's seen this before because we created it. I mean, we dredged it up. Where's Michael? Michael helped in doing that. Where was it? It's in...
Hanging in the vault in our special collection.
Right.
Calvin Smith Library. And it's,
Calvin Smith.
looks like it's on newspaper.
Newsprint, probably, yeah. Yeah.
It's like so fragile. Almost it's
So,
breaking
yeah,
up. It's like
so
crumbling.
it needs restoration. This is another Crane portrait by William Summer this time. Here's another by William Summer of Hart Crane. And here are some apples, which are the subject of the poem that Kathleen's going to read to us. But this is the cover of a catalog that was of Summer's summary catalog after he died. It was at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and this was the cover. And here are the apples. And there's the poem. So Kathleen, it's your turn to read the poem that Hart Crane wrote about Bill Summer.
Sunday morning apples to William Summer. The leaves will fall again sometime and fill the fleece of nature with those purposes that are your rich and faithful strength of line. But now there are challenges to spring in that ripe nude with head reared into a realm of swords her purple shadow bursting on the winter of the world from whiteness that cries defiance to the snow. A boy runs with a dog before the sun, straddling spontaneities that form their independent orbits, their own perennials of light in the valley where you live, called Brandywine. I have seen the apples there that toss you secrets, beloved apples of seasonable madness that feed your inquiries with aerial wine. Put them again beside a pitcher with a knife and poise them, full and ready for explosion. The apples, Bill, the apples.
Thank you. One of the descriptions of summer in the book is of Summer coming in with an apple and cheese over a lunch period. That's how they met, at their lunchtime. I must say, at this point, Summer was working for the Otis Publishing, a printing company. That's how he came to Cleveland. And the Brandywine retreat was something that they both looked forward to, but many times Hart Crane and Summer would go to Hart Crane's house at 115th and on University Circle, 115th, the corner. I would say it is about where George Forbes' house is now, but I used to sit across the way when it was Hart Crane's birthday and celebrate Crane, looking at the window with Daniel Thompson, and then we'd go over to the Euclid Tavern to read our own poems, but we'd read Crane there. So that's Lofkoffs. Do you have some questions about Lofkoffs? Yes.
Not a question. I'm probably one of the few people in the room that remembers Lockoff, because my father took me there every birthday to buy a book. And Mr. Lockoff was never sitting at his desk. He was always way up on a ladder arranging these crates of books. And we also owned several William Summers because they were bought off the wall. So I have this wonderful memory.
Oh, wow. Great.
Anyone else? Kathleen, you were at Lofkoffs, no?
I was at Kai's Gloves.
Oh, I thought you had visited.
I did, but my beginning with bookstores really was Kai's Gloves.
But you went.
As a child, again, Mama used to take us down to Lofkoffs. Before my mother was married, she was part of that group that was the literary group that would meet, and they would go down there, and this was during the Depression, and spirits were not allowed, but they flew. They all drank in the back. And they would have great times, and they would have great conversations, she said, during there. And so when we were 20 years later, when she started having kids, etc., and we would all go in there and get our children's books. He was great with good children's books, Winnie the Pooh and that quality. He didn't have any Disney-type stuff along, but...
He would kick people out if they didn't take off their gloves and didn't handle books correctly. Did she ever tell you that?
Nope, never
No.
told me that.
But
I would imagine he wouldn't have had to tell my mother that.
all right, we're going to move on to Publix. Any more about Lofkoffs?
Well, there's a bridge there. Do you want me to do the bridge? Shh. I think one of the things that you want to present and make sure that people know is that there is a continuity in the bookstores in Cleveland. There has been. And Ann and Bob Levine had Publix Bookmark, but Bob started it before he got married. And the reason he started it was he had a job during the Depression in which he was a bill collector. You guys know this? Okay. And needless to say, he said, well, I had a lot of spare time on my hands. And so he would go into Labakoff's and he would be there and he'd ask questions and he'd talk to them and they just had a great time. Bob Levine's father was Judge Levine. He was the first Jewish judge in Cleveland, and he was a highly respected man. And Bob had an education, and he loved to read, and like that. So when Bob started Publix Bookmart, oh gosh, where was the first one? It wasn't on East Ninth. It was somewhere else.
Prospect and East Ninth.
No, I think there was one earlier than that, but I could be wrong. No, there was. Oh, yeah, this is a good story, but I'll go on later. I want to get that connection. So when Bob started Publix Bookmart, Labakoff was, I think, angry at him that he actually went into competition. So when Labakoff had to move from the Taylor Arcade over to the Euclid Arcade, he did it carrying hand cart by hand cart across the Euclid Avenue. And Bob would try to come and say, here, because he was old by that time. I mean, he was our age by that time. And when he wouldn't let him do it. Labakoff would not let Bob do it because he was, I guess, angry at him for starting another bookstore. And
That's terrific. My relationship with Publix is that my father, who was devoted to the City Club, would take me there, and we'd go there afterwards on Fridays. And the story about my father's books is this. When we were teenagers, he couldn't find all of his books because they were getting, they were in places that he had forgotten. Where were they? In the house. So he designed a summer occupation for my sister and me to learn the Dewey Decimal System and to put those books in order. So we were teenagers at his hand in books. The books we have now, many of them are from Publix. And the reason for that is that I would come home from college, tell him what I wanted, and my father would love coming into Publix with me. So the stories about Publix, I think, Annie, you want to come up here? Or can we hear you from there, or?
I can crank up my voice, yeah.
I can
Okay.
certainly move because I can speak loudly. Why don't you come on up here? Could you get on there?
This is a case of where history will disappear if we don't preserve it. Ann and Bob Levine probably are the only book people who have won the Arts Prize. So the material I have is from that occasion. In 1977, they were given the Cleveland Arts Prize for their work. And the descriptions of the bookstore, people, this is on the internet, that people who were painfully shy went in there and didn't ever emerge. They loved it. It was warm, fuzzy, even documented their interests in every way possible. And they were described as catacombs in the store. The one relative I talked to said he was the climber up to the top and was paid a quarter to do that.
Are you talking about the 9th Street evolution of them before they moved to
yes,
Huron?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
well,
The 9th Street-
actually, I was in the 9th Street one.
Yeah.
And previous to that, they opened up his first bookstore was on 22nd and Prospect. And one of the stories about that one was Bob was just down the street from this store called Mary's Books, and it was a communist bookstore. And this was in the early 50s. And one day, a couple in the 60s or something like that, this guy comes in and he says, you used to have that bookstore, you're down here on East 9th, but you used to have the one on 22nd. And he said, yeah. I said, I did. He said, I was an FBI agent at that time. He said, we came and we spent many days searching your books in your bookstore. And Bob said, wow, I never knew that. And he said, yeah. He said, we were looking for porno. He said, or we were looking for subversive materials. Well, he said, we got your bookstore mixed up with the other one. He said, but we didn't find a thing in your bookstore that we could prosecute you on. I love it. Yeah. So I started working at Publix in 69. I had tuned in, turned on, dropped out, ran away to New York, and got a job in a bookstore in New York at Barnes & Noble. So I know you don't want to mention that.
The good one. No, that's all right. The New York one is all right. The original.
And then afterwards came back to Cleveland and decided that, yes, I did like working in bookstores. And so I got a job at Burroughs. You know Burroughs? Mm-hmm. So they had some textbooks and some new books like that. And I knew that this was not up to the standards that I wanted, so I went over and asked Ann for a job, and she said, yes, that'd be fine. So I started working there and worked there for 3 years. And it was an amazing education. Amazing. Everybody came to Publix. All the authors came to Publix. And wined and dined Ann and Bob. Ann's forte was art, architecture, design, and children's books. And eventually they had a second annex where they had all their children's books in there. And one of the stories about the children's books is they used to sell this book called Little Black Sambo. This is a totally white group here, so we could understand or realize from our point of view, but not from the other point of view, that Little Black Sambo in the United States was a racist book. And it originally was from India, and Little Black Sambo was an Indian character, and it had a different connotation than it did here. Well, just as the black movement was coming up, we had somebody come in, and she was extremely upset that Ann was selling Little Black Sambo. And I remember the discussion. It was just a really, really big talk, and the question is, do you subvert the book, or you take it off the shelf, or whatever? And they ended up taking it off the front of the shelf and putting it in the back, and anybody who requested it, they could have the book, but they would not put it out as a what was then considered a racist book. So there were lots of exciting times then.
There were, and I think it was always full of people.
There were lots, mostly. We did get our work done though. Yeah.
Right. I started in 1978 when, after they'd already moved. Sorry.
I'm sorry, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. My name is Annie Holden, and I got my start at Publix Book Mart. I ended up in various bookstores all over Cleveland, but that's another story. So I started at Publix in 78, coming back to Cleveland after graduate school and not knowing what to do with myself. And I had gone there to the 9th Street store when I was a kid, so my parents were very fond of Ann and Bob. Anyway, so I started working there. This was in the Huron location when they'd moved into the old Milgram's dress shop, which was, huge, spacious, had sort of mezzanine levels of books and these sort of underground hallways, and then the art department was in the back, and that's where I ended up going. Everybody who worked there had a specialty, so you were in charge of a group of books. So mine was the art department, somebody else would be English literature, somebody else would be history. So when you went in, and if that was your subject that you were interested in, you'd say, oh, I have to see Dennis. Is he here today? Because he's the American history buff. So people had their specialties, so you really did get great suggestions and knowledgeable people in those days. Well, we're still knowledgeable, but it's changed. Anyway, so I can remember we had morning meetings before the store opened. You would gather, and Anne would lead these, and all of us, from our different sections would talk about what book we were reading or what we had read and what we thought about it, and she would tell you about, what she was doing, and so it was an education. And working in the art department there, we had dealers from all over the country who came to Publix, and would find these incredible out-of-print books, because Anne had this great eye, and oh my God, the basement was full of gems. So she'd bring them out one at a time. I watched her in action. She was unbelievable. Her customer service and her knowledge were so brilliant. She could sell anything to anybody. I mean, she was just amazing. Wonderful woman. Also Bob, who was a character, but I swear I got a college education just working at Publix, based on the customers and what their likes and dislikes were, and things that I was exposed to, that like David Hockney back in those days in the early 70s or late 70s, and just, I don't know, it was amazing. It was really an amazing place. And it stayed.
Everybody says that.
I know.
And
was.
unbelievable. They would get you any book you wanted.
Right.
Any book.
Even out of print, because we used to keep cards. If people asked for a book that was out of print, you just make a index card about it, and then every so often we do searches, and
I did
they'd
all
find
my work. I think it's Sarah Lawrence and for Thomas Monroe here, and got the books that I needed from Publix.
And this was difficult because you didn't have the internet. You couldn't just look it up. What you would have to do is get on ABA or one of those book wholesaler type lists, and maybe you would find it. And that was part of what you did. Brett Anderson used to do that all the time, is go through the stock, check off what we have, and whether we should go ahead and put the request in.
A.B. Bookman's Weekly.
Yeah,
right.
A.B. Bookman's
Oh, my
Weekly.
God.
Right. Yeah. Right.
There were also bookstores in New York that had lots of out-of-print art books. Now, I don't know whether they used those or not. I know I did.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Ann knew all about that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it was nice to have them also as family friends. They were patients of my father's, and so we did get to visit them at their house. Now, Bob's sister is Mitzi Vering, who is the mother of Michael and the gallery on Adelbert, or Murray Hill rather. And Mitzi's not able to come today, but there were 5 brothers and sisters, and I did investigate one in Nashville. Mitzi's brothers and sisters, this is Bob's.
Really?
Yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
I didn't know that.
Anyway,
I thought they were all Ann's.
we'll check that out.
Okay.
And anyway, that's what Michael told me. And then I contacted one in Nashville who evidently has the inventory that Wesley Williams didn't get later, but he totally disinterested. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is a good example of history disappearing. So ladies, I am so pleased that you have these stories. Does someone from the audience have something to add? Yeah.
I think my mother must have gone there every week, taking me along. I was at school, she was a teacher, and she was very fond of, she used to prowl around in there quite often. I know she had a hairdresser down there somewhere, and I think that's what she said she was doing a lot of the time. Like going off to look for the books.
So what was your mother's name?
Her name was Elizabeth Bassett.
Bassett? Oh, yeah, yeah. I used to write up the orders. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But she taught school, so she had a good idea about what the children should have. And if we needed summer reading, we could get it down there. We always wanted them short, please.
Those were the days of house accounts. But,
Yes, right, yeah.
people had house accounts, so you get billed once a month. And, that was something. And there was one customer, Hank Kurth, from Case.
Yes, oh, good.
Who was
I'm
the
glad
only
you-
one allowed to write up his own house accounts. He could come behind the counter and write up his own. Right. And he did a lot. He was a very regular customer
And
there.
I must say, in my conversation with Russell Duino,
Yeah.
who, I don't think he came, but he does live across the street, and he's written the history of bookstores in Cleveland as a manuscript that he wrote as a, in college. He's been improving it year by year. And so when I hit the Western Reserve Historical Society, and Ann Sindelar pointed this out, it was wonderful. And I called him over and we had coffee. And he said that Hank Kurth was the one that had the biggest collection.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Hank and Ann loved each other.
Yeah.
She would get him anything, and he had deep pockets, so it was not a problem like that. She had several people like that.
Now, Hank Kurth was at Case Western Reserve University in the theater department, just to explain who he was.
He was very tall, and was very forbidding, like that. You said, yes, sir. Said him a lot.
I have a handout with Ed and Bob and the story that was written by Mark Gottlieb when they won the Arts Prize in 1977. It's on the back table there.
Yeah, great.
All right.
Was there another question over, another,
Just what
remember?
happens to collections like that when the place is closed? Now, you mentioned that a relative of Mitzi's got some of the public.
Okay, well, I can tell you a little bit about what happened to Publix at the end of the East 9th Street store. So they were 22nd, and then they stayed in East 9th Street the bulk of their time from early mid-50s to the 80s. I think it was the 80s. No, 70s. 70s.
Yeah.
And so during that time, they filled up their store, which was right on the corner of East 9th and Prospect. They had a big basement, and the big basement was totally full of books, absolutely jammed, packed, but not the good stuff. Good stuff was upstairs. So if you had a history of an area, the good stuff would be on the first floor under the history department, and the other stuff would be downstairs in the basement. However, every once in a while, something new would come up. I remember when the ecology movement came in, and Bob Levine had a whole bunch of nature books downstairs in an alcove about going down here to here, about up through here. And within a couple months, this whole section was it was picked clean of anything good. All the good books were just, because people were looking for research on it. And, the story of a blade of grass is the same, whether it's 100 years ago or today, pretty much. But anyhow, so they would go through there, and he had a whole section of National Geographics down there. Yeah.
The National Geographic room.
Yes.
The room that customers wouldn't go in. It actually extended under the street,
Yes.
and the conditions were worse than most coal mines.
Yes. This is true.
Another gentleman were given the job of straightening it out, putting everything in order.
Oh, Lord.
And at the end of, I think it took us 3 days, We
That's
didn't
quick.
try to clean our clothes. But it was an astounding place to be in.
Yeah, yeah. Bob always said, well, they only ever want the same 5 editions of the National Geographic. And these guys are nodding their head also. But he had them. Okay, so Publix building was bought by Cleveland Trust, because Cleveland Trust was going to put a parking lot in that. They were going to make a parking structure in that area there. And I remember Bob coming up and saying, well, I'm afraid we'll have to close. And I said, you can't do that! And he looked at me, he said, I'm glad you had that reaction. He said, I think we'll probably not close, we'll probably stop for a while and then reopen later. And so I think even at that point, he was in negotiations with where he would be going. So what they needed to do was to box up all the good stuff, most of the stuff on the first floor, and some of the stuff in the basement, but not a lot. So, and then he just left them there, and he closed the door, and he walked away, and he got notices from Cleveland Trust, and they eventually, because somebody had to take it out, and they eventually took it out and they sold it for waste. All those books down there, all those books. It was just by the pound, landfill. And he had to pay the moving fees. Boy, he was madder than a wet hen over that one. But, you know, what can you do? His problem was he had to be out of there quickly. And the lease was up, they couldn't renew it, they sprung this on him, and boom, he had to go.
So, now that Publix is closed, I think we need to move on to the present.
Okay?
Is that okay? Have you
Sure.
said what you need to say? Good. We're going to,
Let me just add one thing. You know, I used to be a phone-in customer just for years. And I studied political science in college, focusing on foreign affairs. And I was ordering these very heavy books that I had no idea you had to order from a university press, ergo pay $2 extra for the book. But I just ordered one after another for years. And I never went to the store. And one day, I don't know what possessed me, maybe I just happened to be in the neighborhood, but I walked in the store, and when she heard my name, she went, I don't believe it! I'm finally meeting who this person is on the phone. Anyway, I finally started working there, but it was just after they had sold the store. I was a steady customer. Mom went there all the time. She bought art books. And she said, honest to God, if Ann piles one more book in my arms before I leave the store, I'm never going back. But I heard that every time she went there. My one real regret is that my father never could come in and see me working there. He was such a book person. Even though he never really revealed these things to anyone, he wanted to be very average, and, you know, like everyone else. But he would quote me things I couldn't believe. He would hand me a book that had a poem about a cat I had just gotten the same name, and I never knew how he knew all this stuff. But anyway, yeah.
thank you for adding that. Thank you.
Okay, so Publix was closing, and they closed for about 6 months, and then reopened. But in the meantime, there was a staff there, and 3 of us decided that what we would do is open our own bookstore. Brett Anderson, who was known as Bob's Boy, he did just about everything that Bob asked him to do. Lynn Hopkins, who was eventually became a children's children's book buyer for Borders books, among other things. And I decided that we would open a place, and we looked around. We thought, well, maybe the west side, maybe the east side. And Bob looked at us and said, don't ever open a bookstore on the west side. Why? They always close. And you know what? Damn if he isn't right. There's only one, the bookstore on West 25th Street, and also Zubel's. Those are the only two that have ever survived. The others, they come up and they go down. And anyhow. So we decided we would go up to Coventry, being Coventry was just beginning to be the place to go for young hippies and you know, the people, the hipsters of that generation, you know, whatever. It used to be an old Jewish neighborhood, and it had lots of small little stores. We found the store called Addison's book dress shop, and so we rented it for, I think, $175 a month or something like that. It was pretty good. What I've done is I've put together a small little album of some of the stuff that we have, and the first picture is the picture of Brett Anderson, myself, and Lynn Hopkins. And what I'll do is I'll pass this around in a minute. But we started it in 1972, and I closed it in 1983. What we did is we took the knowledge that we got from Publix. We knew books. We didn't know a lot about business, but we did know books. We learned enough about business to keep going in that fashion. We were the only bookstore outside of the ones downtown. There were a couple like Corner and Wood at Fairmount and Cedar, and there was another one in there. Kay's was downtown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apple tree.
Apple Trees was much later, yeah. So we were the only bookstore that had opened up outside of downtown in many generations. We chose that place because we felt that we had a built-in population of readers, which was the people from Case. A lot of them lived in the apartment buildings around there. And a lot of people were interested in books. So we started off there, and I don't know, what else should I say?
What was it called?
I'm sorry, it was called Coventry Books.
Oh, Coventry.
Yes, right. When we first opened up, the bookshop was in, as I said, an old dress shop. We opened the door to the basement when we first walked in there and jumped back. As soon as we had turned the light on, we looked down, and there were bodies at the bottom of the stair.
Mannequins.
They were mannequins. They were old mannequins. And I have a picture of them in here, so you can take a look.
Oh, that is great.
It was horrific. We started the Cleveland Street Fair. We were the first big street fair that went on in Cleveland like that. After a couple of years, I think 3 years in the shop that we had, which was where Record Revolution is now, we moved over to where Tommy's is now. And we had, again, we took the carts, but that was that was fun. And so we were there for about a better part of 10 years, I guess, and all. I eventually bought out my partners, and then big bookstores moved in. We had a Dalton's at Severance, and I can trace on my financial records where Dalton was, and then more of them, and things like that. But the thing I wanted to mention for what Nina is trying to say is there was a continuity, but we were called little publics sometimes. We knew all the book dealers. They would come in, they would take us out to lunch and sell us things, and you know, they would say, well, Publix bought so many of these, how many do you want? Okay, so why don't I just pass this around and you all can take a look at it as you wish. There you go.
Anything more before we call?
She's talking about little Publix. Before we get on to Coventry, my former husband and I have formed our own bookstore after Publix closed in '82.
Right.
We had been protégés. In fact, I met my husband at Publix. We both worked there. And in fact, they closed the store the day we got married. Because we invited the whole staff to the wedding. I forgot about that. Anyway, so we opened a small shop on Lee Road where Wordsworth books had been. And I don't remember when that had started, but it was just, you know, one of those little hole in the walls. I think it's the Christian Science Reading Room now, or I don't even remember what it is now.
Yeah.
So Tony and I bought Wordsworth books and made Avis Bookshop. He wanted to be a sheep farmer, but we ended up in books instead, so that was great. But we had a big sheep in the window. And so it was used mostly. We'd order a few new books, but we had spent lots of time with Ann and Bob, you know, when they had closed and Wes had taken over the store. We were still working there, but we spent evenings with Ann and Bob, and then Ann, after Bob had gone, and she would counsel us. So we felt like we were another tributary of the Publix, you know, great ocean.
I just want to say that I don't think book people ever die.
No, we don't.
They don't. They just pass along
Right.
what they learn and what they want and
Totally.
what nurtures them.
Oh, they die.
Well,
But somebody else
the
starts
point is history does die. but-
It does too. At the same time, around this era, there were bookstores downtown called Ace. Anybody remember Aces? Okay, mostly paperbacks. Schroeder's
Oh,
on the
yeah.
square. Yeah, that was a good commuter bookstore.
Yep.
You wait for your bus and then you run in there like that. Let's see, what else do we
Those are
have?
the Williamson buildings.
Yeah.
Yep,
Before
Right.
the BP
Yeah.
building took over. Yeah.
bookstore on West 25th Street. Let's see. There was,
The Shaker Bookshop, yeah, I
Great.
worked at the Shaker Bookshop.
Did
when I
you?
was in art school, yeah.
oh, no kidding. Yeah, that's great.
I don't know its history or how
Yeah.
long it was there, but I
Yeah.
remember that.
It was there certainly in the 50s.
This would have been in the 60s.
Yeah, yeah, it was there in the 50s. And I remember going over and talking to them when we were about ready to open up Coventry Books and introducing myself and hoping that they weren't going to be very upset that there was another place. So that's true, that was there. And then it had several reincarnations. Booksellers, of course,
Right.
Joan Hulbert. Let's see, what else do we Kay's, Kaisergoff's. Oh, Kay's. So, anybody remember Kay's?
On Prospect. Yeah.
So I had this friend, I said, well, what do you remember about Kay's? And she said, I used to love to go in there because their books were so cheap. Oh, yeah? Yeah, she said, they didn't have a cover, but the books were very... Well, of course, in those days, you had a paperback, and if you had a paperback and you wanted to return it, what you did was you ripped off the cover. You were supposed to throw away the guts and send the cover back to the publisher, and you would get credit for it. So Mrs. K got both sides of it. Let's see. I can't think. Can anybody else come up with other bookstores?
In that era.
There
Well,
was,
you have a list of what is available now. But one of the sad things for me is Visible Voice, which was on the west side and decided to go out of business. I guess I've read poetry at most of these bookstores, but that was one where you read outside, and it was very, very sad that we had one that seemed to be thriving. Well, thriving is maybe not the word. He struggled, but is no longer. And somebody might want to comment, maybe at the end here, why the West Side has not nurtured bookstores.
I can tell you. I opened up a second bookstore in Berea called Berea Books, and I was counseled against it at that time. And what I found out was people on the west side read, and they read voraciously, but they go to libraries. They're library readers, and there's a big difference between that. You know, they'll go out and buy some books sometime, but not enough to support a bookstore for a long time.
I can attest to that fact, because I grew up, the Berea Library was my library, and my mom would go there every week.
Yeah.
Take home armloads of books, and then go back the next week, and she'd sit in her chair, I'd sit in my chair, and we would just read and read and read and read.
Yeah.
But it was the library.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting because I am contemplating a session on libraries.
Good.
And Margaret Simon and I are working on that.
Oh, good.
Shaker Library.
Yeah, sure.
She will be here next time because we have a history of Shaker done by the Shaker Library, and you'll be able to buy it next time. Okay.
You know what? Okay, sorry. One West Side comment. When I worked at Publix for those 3 years, I did feel discriminated against because the bookkeeper and I were the only people from the West Side. All the employees from the East Side, and they used to tease us and say, "Oh, you read on the West Side? Oh, we didn't know that." Anyway.
Okay. It's your
Mrs.
turn.
Mitchell was the bookkeeper.
Mrs. Mitchell.
Yeah.
Suzanne, it's your turn.
Yeah.
So now we walk down the street from Coventry Books to Max Bass. And
I'm
this
Suzanne.
is Suzanne De Gaetano, who has been nurturing the writers of today.
Well, so my background is I grew up in Cleveland Heights, and we also were library people. We went to the library a lot, and as kids didn't go to the bookstores, I learned about Publix and K's and all these grand places pretty much after I got out of college and got into the book business and talked to customers about the history of book selling. We lived on Lee Road and right down the street from the main Lee Road Library, and I just walked down the street to go to the library. I went to college at Miami University and came back and worked in the medical field for a couple years and also in restaurants. And one of the guys that I met at the restaurant I was working at is a guy named Jim McSherry, and he had bought a bookstore in Chagrin Falls. There was a woman named Lee Kuhn who had been at Hiram, and she opened a used bookstore in Chagrin Falls and then moved out west. So Jim bought the store and moved it to Kent, Ohio for a year while he went to graduate school. Then he moved it back to Chagrin Falls, and that was in 1978. In 1982, I had worked for a couple years in the medical field in the audiovisual department of the podiatry school. And then I had traveled for about a year when I came back, kind of looking for something to do. And at the same time, the store that Jim had in Chagrin Falls was very tiny, and he had way too many books for the store, so he was looking to expand it. And I had always been a Heights resident and thought it would be that Coventry would be a good spot. And here's how naive I was. There was a bookstore in Coventry. But I, just thought, well, that makes it a good place for books. So we opened it in above, at the time the Dabama Theater was on the main floor, and we were upstairs. There were some apartments up there, and so we were up there for about a year and a half. And then we had an opportunity to move down the street, down closer to where Mayfield is. So we moved down there and we were there for 8 years. And then we moved to our present location in 1993. So we were, and are essentially a used bookstore, a book exchange. We trade for books. I guess, I get the philosophy. My philosophy is my grandfather had started a produce business from a cart, downtown Cleveland, and it grew into, a bigger business and eventually became a produce wholesaler. And so that was sort of our family and our family tradition. And in my mind, I just thought, well, I will be, at first I thought I'll just be at the store for, until it gets established. Well, it's a bookstore is never established, really. It's always an organic and growing thing. And I just kept learning things and growing with the store. So, but I want to say about Coventry Books. I remember a couple years when I was working at the podiatry school, I was a customer of Coventry Books. In fact, I bought Jim, my business partner, a set of the Harvard Classics there. I ordered a Jim Morrison poetry book for my brother there. I remember these specific transactions because Coventry Books was such a mainstay and really was the model for book selling. I think for a lot of our contemporary booksellers here. A couple other notes I took from listening. Nina mentioned Daniel Thompson. He was also a mentor. When we moved the store down the street in 1984 to a bigger spot, he was also looking to start a poetry reading series. They were doing one at Arabica, but there was censorship concerns there, so they wanted a place that wasn't going to censor poetry. And actually, the whole time that we've been doing poetry readings, ever since 1984, all these years, there's never been a censorable moment. But I think in a coffee shop environment, it's a little bit different. There's all kinds of people constantly listening, and maybe it was more sensitive there. So at any rate, we started our poetry reading series in 1984. Daniel Thompson and the guy who took the other picture that was up there with the wreath, Dennis McDonald, were the two who had the reading series at the time, and we've been doing that ever since. And also, just a moving story, when we moved from down near Mayfield to the spot that we're in now, we rented a couple big trucks and invited a lot of friends, and we took all of our books into paper bags and put them on the truck and drove them down the street, and the shelves were set up on the main floor, and we just put them right up on the shelves. We had a lot of books that had to go down the basement, and that took about another month to open, but that move essentially took a day if you have a lot of friends to help. Well, we didn't have anywhere near as many books as we have now. So that's my story.
Everyone know where Max Bax is and been there and thrived with it. Suzanne, anything more?
Where'd the name come from?
Yeah.
Where'd they come from?
Well, my business partner's name is James McSherry, and when he first opened the store, the two of us were friends. He was, thinking of different names, and so his nickname was Mac, and I suggested Max Bax because he was a paperback store, and we gradually grew into other kinds of books, but that's where it came from, Max Bax paperbacks.
So are you still all paperbacks and used books?
No, we're new and used now, and I say used because we really don't do much with antiquarian books or collectible books. If I get calls for those kinds of books, I usually recommend they call Harriet at Loganberry. I don't really think that's my expertise or our trade, so we're pretty solidly new and used books. And of course, just like that thing that you put up from the bookstore about what a bookseller does, that's exactly what we do now.
Before that.
We still order books for customers. If we don't have something, we can get it. Another thing that I think animates and motivates us is promoting local authors and also doing book events, connecting readers and authors, and trying to create an atmosphere where there's a lot of cultural conversation around books.
I think that's one of the points also that in the continuum is that both new and used, which was very unusual. Usually you had either it was a used bookstore or a new bookstore. And both Labikoff, Publix, us, you guys, Harriet, have done both of those. And yeah, that's it.
Well, kind of the industry wisdom, or what people say now, is that a lot of the stores that were able to survive the onslaught of, the mega bookstores and Amazon are the stores that have been able to combine new and used because they had different income streams from the two kinds of books.
Should we discuss Amazon later?
We don't have to discuss that.
No, we don't. They're not Cleveland. They're not.
Right.
They influence us, but they're not Cleveland.
Okay, Harriet. Loganberry. Now, I remember Loganberry when it wasn't in an independent place. It was with the rug store. Yeah.
We opened in '94, sharing space with my friend Dee Dee Moore, who sold Oriental rugs. We were two separate businesses always, but we shared space. So we had some utilities that we split down the middle, but the books were entirely separate. Neither one of us had any employees, but we leaned on each other heavily. Dee Dee sold mostly Turkish and Persian rugs, mostly antiquarian, although she then dipped into some new weaves. I learned the rug trade. She learned the book trade. I can sell you a rug, no problem. This is on Larchmere. We were in what we call the Sedlak building at the corner of East 127th and Larchmere, the old Sedlak building. And Loganberry started as new and antiquarian books exclusively. You have difficulties in life when you partner with people who are much older than you are. I've done this several times. So Dee Dee retired about 8 years after we opened. And she sold her business. We had actually before that broken down a wall and expanded our space because the books and the rugs kept multiplying like rabbits. You don't look and there are more. So after Dee Dee retired and sold her business to Erdogan Gezer, business changed for me drastically. And it wasn't just turning around and seeing a new box of books that you needed to shelve. It was trying to find the bookcase behind 5 rolls of rugs. So I decided that our growing pains were extreme and I needed my own space. And in a year where everything wrong that happened could happen in your life, 2002 hit. But then something good happened, and my mother and I invested in a building that became available down the street. So we moved to this building, which was originally the Shaker Garage in 1919, I think. There's also a rumor that this building was home to a Studebaker showroom. I have no pictures to prove it. It was huge. I did not know if I could fill all that space, but you don't worry about it because the books will multiply on their own. And the good and bad news of this building, there are lots of good and bad news of this building, but there's no basement. This is both good and bad. So I have no place where my books go to rot, but I also have no storage. So it's a funny shop in which you see the workings. There is no way to avoid the fact that we are continually processing books and cleaning books, and that backscene work is kind of the exoskeleton of my store because it's never hidden. When we moved to this new space, really quadrupling our space, the space was twice the size, but I had no rugs in front of the bookcases anymore. So I really expanded in territory. I needed staff, and I started delving more into new books. And as the big new booksellers disappeared, Joseph, Beth, and Borders and booksellers, my demand for new books also grew. So we are now very much integrated as a new, used, and antiquarian bookshop. We're now 21 years. This is, yeah, that's our shop. That's current. What would you like, Nina?
Exactly what you said, which is great. I remember buying all my children's books with you in the very beginning. I mean, you know, if you live long enough, you've been at the beginning and ends of these things.
Yeah.
But you really, you know, I couldn't believe your present program of the month, which I get. It's got, why don't you describe your programs? Because you have an enormous number of things going on that are, you know, in addition to the books.
Well, bookstores are kind of community centers, and it's a lure that we cultivate. And as such, Loganberry and Max and every other bookstore I know has events to bring people into the store and new things to invent and create, because you're forever reinventing yourself to get the word out, because you have to do something to get foot traffic in, you know? We are open late on Wednesday and Thursday evenings with a rotation of events. We have an annex gallery that has an opening reception, and each month we have a different artist, local shows for mostly upcoming unknown artists. We have a Knobs Forums, which is a more erudite program run by the Northern Ohio Bibliophilic Society, Conversations Through the Book World, which includes book making, printing, paper making, publishing history, collecting aspects. We'll have a history of Beatrix Potter coming up, and a forum on the future of cursive handwriting. Interesting talks on whatever grabs us in the broader scope of the physical object of book. Yeah, I'll get there.
Okay.
What's the fourth? Oh, book clubs. We have a book club that reads classics, and we call it the Bucket List Book Club now, and a book club that reads brand new books that may or may not be considerations for the Caldecott and Newbery Awards. On Thursdays, we have open mics, one for music, one for poetry, and we just started a vintage entertainment program, so we have classic radio nights and classic movies. We also have special events. Ellie's throwing a postcard at me here for the Edible Books Festival, which is its 13th year, and it is tomorrow. If you don't know what an edible book is, I just urge you to come on down and see. The rules are you create something that has something to do with books, you interpret that rule, and make it out of edible materials. So the way people interpret those two rules varies greatly, and that's why the festival is fun. We also have a summer event called Author Alley, in which we invite authors to come and sell their wares. We invite mainstream authors and people you've heard of, as well as local self-published authors who need their day in the sun. We cap it at 50, and we have to cap it because demand is so high.
Okay.
It's an interesting thing. The time of Libekoff and Publix, the only other than actually selling a book would be when a author came in, and you would have author sales. You know, an author would talk, and then you would have maybe a poetry reading. Publix never had any of that stuff, at least when I was there. But then it changed, and it was really important to keep your bookstore going. And people liked the idea of it being a community center. And so I think the bookstores that aimed at expressing more community-related things were the bookstores that were meaningful and say a lot. And one other bookstore that we haven't talked very much about is Booksellers. And although they weren't a new and used bookstore, although Joan was beginning to think about it at the end, but mostly they were a brand new bookstore. And they had, I could always tell when a bookstore started to get in lots of knickknacks. A few is fine, but lots of knickknacks. You could tell that the finances were moving more on selling junk rather than selling books itself. But anyhow, you had a question?
I was just gonna ask Carrie to talk about the art, and she did, so.
Okay.
The art, yes, sir.
I was just thinking about Publix, when you talk about events and how stores are so event-driven. We have to be, but in Publix, when at the later incarnation, we had Ansel Adams. It was like one event a year, and it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Nice.
And there was a reception, and I mean, it was fabulous, but it was Ansel Adams, Buckminster Fuller, Isamu Noguchi.
Yeah.
And that was it, but that was wonderful. Yeah.
I remember reading an article in Publishers Weekly this time that Ellie's talking about during the transition when stores were doing more events, and one store somewhere was going out of business, and the woman that owned it said, "It's not enough I'm selling books, now I have to be a damned hostess." And, you know, we
It's
know
true.
nothing else, I mean, that's just the
Yeah.
way it is, but,
Yeah,
Right. I remember Richard Gildenmeister.
absolutely.
Oh,
Finally,
good
of
hostess.
course.
Very.
And Richard would connect a lot. But what he loved to do was to entertain the artists, the writers, bring them here.
Yeah.
And when he was downtown, having a display of the materials that he personally had, and had given to the library, it was astounding. The materials came from all kinds of authors, and they were downtown at the Cleveland Public Library. So I do believe we're all library people. We're all at the bone, and then the bookstores give us the opportunity to own those books and to have fun as a community because, you really have meetings at libraries, but you don't always get a chance to really communicate. Anybody have there are some handouts, and I just want to point out that we did purposely put the artists from Lakoff's walls on the table. Bill Tregoning did that, but the point is that those artists are there because somebody preserved their legacy. It's true. There's a Frank Wilcox exhibit that's gorgeous at the Western Reserve Historical Society right now.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yep,
good.
till the end of the month.
Oh.
And
Which month? April?
Yeah,
Oh, okay, good.
this month.
The name has
And
changed.
it's beautiful.
The name has changed. We have to remember that the name has changed to the Cleveland History
Oh, the
Center.
History
Oh,
Center.
really?
Well,
Can we still call it the Hissy?
they still, they're still online with the Western Reserve Historical Society. They still are online as the umbrella. The other thing is that we do not have the opportunity to see as much summer because there is not a lot written. And we uncovered these things in the basement of the archival area of the Western Reserve Library, the Hart Crane material. And so it isn't absolutely on loan easily, and it's not always in the best of shape, meaning that it needs restoration and that kind of thing. The other artist is Frank Wilcox. Oh, well, I talked about Frank Wilcox, but Charles Birchfield. There is a homestead. If you want to go to Salem, Ohio, and see where he grew up and where he, as a teenager, drew on the walls of his house, that's where you go. And that is, that was put together. I mean, that's where he started painting his own environment in Salem, Ohio. And of course, he went worlds beyond that. But Dick Wooten, who used to be the Cleveland Press arts editor, lives in Salem and started that, and that's become his passion, to make that place work as a little museum. And then there's the Birchfield Penny Museum in outside of Buffalo. But I just want to say that legacy depends on people caring afterwards. And it needs publication and it needs nurturing. So the next session is next week, and it's totally different. It will be about this building as an important building, high-rise, multiple housing. It will be about Shaker Towers, very different and built because of a social reason at Shaker Square. We have that documented in a film. And Lakeview Terrace, which is downtown. Now, we've been connected to all this material. So Lakeview Terrace is the first or second public housing here, and it is the only one that was critiqued by Louis Mumford, who is an architectural critic of the early part of the century. And so he got notice, and the firm that did it restored it, and there's McVeigh sculpture pieces on the history of Cleveland on that building. So you will see that next time. So thank you for coming. Thank you all.
Thank you. What an opportunity.
Well, it'll be on my website.
Okay,
We're
good.
we can't afford a lot of
And that program, NOVS,
fancy